When I first heard about the old county road that supposedly disappeared, I dismissed it as a local legend. One of those stories townspeople tell to entertain visitors or scare children. But when the chance arose to explore it for myself, curiosity got the better of me. I had recently taken up a new hobby of exploring forgotten places, and this seemed like the perfect opportunity to test my mettle and see if there was any truth to the tale. The road was supposedly located in the middle of nowhere, a forgotten relic from a bygone era. It was said to have been abandoned decades ago after a series of accidents, and now it was nothing more than an overgrown path that some claimed had a habit of vanishing. I was skeptical but intrigued. Armed with a map and a GPS, I set out on a crisp autumn morning, eager to see if there was any truth to the local lore. The drive to the area was uneventful. I passed through rolling hills and dense forests, the landscape shifting from open fields to thick woods as I approached the general location where the road was supposed to be. The GPS indicated I was close. The road had become increasingly narrow and winding, the foliage growing thicker and more tangled. I parked my car at the edge of what appeared to be a dirt path and began my hike. The path was overgrown with brambles and creeping vines, but it was still discernible. I followed it cautiously, my boots crunching on the fallen leaves. The forest around me was eerily quiet, save for the occasional rustle of leaves in the breeze. The trees were tall and dense, their branches forming a canopy that blocked out much of the sunlight. It felt like walking through a living tunnel, the world narrowing with each step. As I continued, I noticed something strange. The path seemed to curve in on itself, the direction shifting unpredictably. It was as if the road had a mind of its own, leading me deeper into the woods. I checked my map and GPS frequently, but the signals were becoming increasingly erratic. My sense of direction was starting to falter, and an unsettling feeling began to creep into my thoughts. After what felt like hours of walking, I came across an old wooden sign partially obscured by overgrowth. It was barely legible, but I could make out the words County Road 77 beneath layers of grime and decay. Excitement surged through me. I had found it. The legendary road was real. But as I moved closer to examine the sign, a sudden gust of wind whipped through the trees, sending leaves and debris swirling around me. The atmosphere grew colder, and the silence of the forest was broken by the sound of distant voices, muffled, indecipherable, and just on the edge of hearing. I strained to make out what was being said, but the voices seemed to come from all directions, creating an eerie sense of disorientation. I pressed on, following the path deeper into the woods. The road began to take on a more defined shape, the overgrowth lessening, as if someone or something was clearing it ahead of me. It felt almost as if the road was inviting me to continue, beckoning me further into its depths. Eventually, I reached a point where the path opened up into a small clearing. At its center stood a dilapidated building, its wooden walls rotting and sagging. It looked like an old maintenance shed or a forgotten rest stop. Its roof caved in and its windows shattered. The building was surrounded by a broken fence, its posts leaning at odd angles. I approached the building cautiously, the creaking of the old wood underfoot adding to the eerie atmosphere. Inside, the shed was a clutter of old, rusted tools and broken furniture. A layer of dust covered everything, and cobwebs hung from the corners of the ceiling. I noticed a set of old, faded maps pinned to the wall, their edges yellowed and curling. As I examined the maps, I realized they were detailed schematics of the road and its surroundings. There were notes scribbled in the margins, written in a scrawling hand. Most of it was indecipherable, but a few phrases stood out. Road moves not where it should be and beware the shifts. A chill ran down my spine as I read the notes. They seemed to confirm the unsettling feeling I had been experiencing. The road wasn't just abandoned. It was actively changing, shifting in ways that defied logic. I wondered if the voices I had heard were somehow connected to this phenomenon. I turned to leave the shed, but as I stepped outside, I noticed something alarming. The path that had led me here was gone. In its place was an impenetrable wall of trees and underbrush. The road had vanished, leaving me trapped in the clearing with no visible way out. Panic set in as I scrambled to find another route. I tried to push through the dense foliage, but the branches seemed to close in around me, as if they were actively blocking my escape. The air grew colder, and the voices returned, louder and more insistent this time. They were closer now, echoing through the trees in a disorienting cacophony. Desperation fueled my attempts to find a way out, but no matter how hard I tried, the trees and undergrowth seemed to shift and change, leading me in circles. I felt like I was being herded, pushed back toward the center of the clearing where the shed stood. The sense of being watched grew stronger, and I could feel eyes on me from every direction. Time seemed to lose all meaning as I wandered through the forest, my exhaustion and fear mounting with every step. I tried to use my GPS, but the signal was completely dead. My phone's battery was running low, and I knew I had to find a way out before it died completely. In the distance, I saw a flicker of light through the trees. Hope surged through me as I headed toward it, pushing through the dense underbrush. As I emerged from the forest, I was relieved to find myself back at the road where I had parked my car. The familiar sight of my vehicle was a beacon of safety. I hurried back to the car, my hands trembling as I unlocked it and climbed inside. I started the engine and drove away, the road behind me becoming a blur as I put as much distance between myself and the forest as possible. The experience left me shaken and deeply unsettled. I couldn't explain what had happened on that road, nor could I shake the feeling that something had been watching me, guiding me, and keeping me from escaping. The road had been real, but it had also been something far more sinister, an ever-changing, malevolent force that I had narrowly escaped. I haven't returned to that area since. The story of the disappearing road still haunts me, a reminder of the eerie encounter and the strange shifting path that seemed to exist just beyond the edge of reality. The road may have vanished, but the memories of that day remain as vivid and unsettling as ever. Running has always been my escape. There's something about the rhythm of my feet hitting the ground, the steady cadence of my breath, and the way the world narrows down to the path ahead that clears my mind like nothing else. Fall was my favorite time to run. Early mornings when the air was crisp, the trees painted in vibrant reds and oranges, and the ground beneath my feet carpeted with fallen leaves. The trail I chose today was one I knew well. It wound through the woods just outside town, a secluded path that offered both a challenge and a chance to be alone with my thoughts. I'd run this trail dozens of times, and I knew every twist and turn, every hill and dip. It was familiar, comforting even, and today was no different, or so I thought. As I passed the 2-mile mark, the sun was just beginning to rise, casting long shadows through the trees. The world was quiet, save for the crunch of leaves underfoot and the occasional rustle of the wind through the branches. I was in the zone, focused on my breathing and the steady pace I'd set when something caught my eye. It was subtle at first, just a sense that something was off. The trees on either side of the trail looked different, hollowed out, their bark unnaturally smooth and devoid of the usual roughness. I slowed my pace, my eyes scanning the woods. The trees looked as if something had clawed out their insides, leaving behind smooth, empty shells. I'd never noticed anything like it before, and it sent a chill down my spine. I came to a stop, my heart still pounding from the run, but now tinged with a growing unease. The woods felt different today, almost unnatural. The early morning light, which usually felt warm and welcoming, now seemed harsh, casting strange shadows that twisted and stretched in ways that didn't seem right. I told myself it was just my imagination, a trick of the light or perhaps some disease affecting the trees. But even as I tried to rationalize it, the uneasy feeling in my gut persisted. I started running again, but my pace was slower now, my senses heightened. Every rustle of leaves, every snap of a twig made me jump, my eyes darting to the source of the sound. I was just about to turn back, thinking maybe today wasn't the best day for a run, when I saw it, a figure, small and hunched, crouched near the base of one of the hollowed-out trees. It was too small to be an adult, but its limbs were long and twisted, the angles all wrong. For a moment, I thought it was a child, lost or hurt, and I felt a surge of concern. But as I got closer, I realized something was very wrong. The figure didn't move, didn't make a sound. It was just there, huddled against the tree, its back turned to me. I called out, my voice shaky, asking if they were okay, but there was no response. My heart pounded in my chest, and every instinct screamed at me to turn around and run. But I couldn't leave without knowing what, or who, it was. I took a few hesitant steps closer, the leaves crunching loudly underfoot in the stillness of the woods. As I approached, I noticed the figure wasn't wearing clothes, at least not in the conventional sense. It was wrapped in what looked like old, tattered fabric, dirty and torn. But there was no movement, no sign of life. When I was just a few feet away, I realized it wasn't a person at all. It was a pile of old clothes, bundled up and placed in a way that vaguely resembled a crouching figure. My relief was immediate, followed by a wave of embarrassment. I'd gotten myself worked up over nothing, scared by a bunch of dirty rags left in the woods. I laughed nervously, the sound hollow in the stillness. But as I turned to leave, something made me pause. The ground around the clothes was disturbed. The dirt churned up as if something, or someone, had been digging. Deep scratches marked the earth, leading to a small hole beside the tree. The hair on the back of my neck stood up as I stared at the hole, a sense of dread washing over me. Something about it felt wrong, but I couldn't put my finger on why. I didn't want to be there anymore. The woods, which had always felt like a sanctuary, now felt hostile, alien. I backed away from the pile of clothes, my eyes darting around, expecting to see someone or something watching me from the trees. But there was nothing, just the silent, hollow woods. I turned and ran, my feet pounding the trail as I raced back the way I'd come. My breath came in ragged gasps, and my heart felt like it was going to burst out of my chest. But I didn't slow down. I didn't stop until I was back at my car, panting and sweating, my hands shaking as I fumbled with the keys. When I finally got home, I tried to shake off the feeling, telling myself it was just a weird experience, nothing more. I threw my clothes in the washer, determined to forget about the whole thing. But that night, as I was getting ready for bed, I noticed something that made my blood run cold. There was dirt under my fingernails, fresh dirt. I hadn't been digging, hadn't touched the ground at all. But there it was, caked under my nails as if I'd been clawing at the earth. I scrubbed my hands raw, trying to get the dirt out, but the unease wouldn't leave me. I barely slept that night, my mind replaying the events of the morning over and over. When I finally drifted off, my dreams were filled with images of those hollow trees, of something lurking just out of sight, watching, waiting. The next morning, I tried to shake off the lingering unease. It was just my imagination, I told myself. I was tired, stressed, and I'd let my mind play tricks on me. But as I headed out to take the trash, I saw something that made my heart skip a beat. Sitting on my front porch, neatly folded, were the same tattered clothes I'd seen in the woods. I froze, my breath catching in my throat. The clothes were dirty, torn, just as they had been when I found them. But now, they were here at my front door, as if someone, or something, had brought them back. My mind raced, trying to make sense of it. Maybe someone was playing a prank, trying to mess with me. But who, and why? I looked around, searching for any sign of movement, any indication that someone was nearby. But the street was empty, eerily quiet in the early morning light. I didn't know what to do. Part of me wanted to throw the clothes away, to burn them and be done with it. But another part of me was too scared to touch them, afraid of what might happen if I did. In the end, I left them there, backing into the house and locking the door behind me. I spent the rest of the day on edge, jumping at every little noise, every creak of the floorboards. My thoughts kept drifting back to the woods, to those hollowed-out trees, and the strange figure that wasn't really a figure at all. That night, I barricaded myself in my room, trying to convince myself that it was all just a coincidence. A series of unrelated events that my mind was twisting into something sinister. But deep down, I knew that wasn't true. Something was wrong, terribly wrong, and I was caught in the middle of it. As I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, I heard it, a soft scratching sound coming from outside. My heart leapt into my throat as I strained to listen. The sound was faint, but unmistakable, like something or someone scraping against the side of the house. I wanted to ignore it, to pretend I didn't hear anything, but the sound grew louder, more insistent. I forced myself to get up, my hands trembling as I crept to the window. I pulled back the curtain just a crack, peering out into the darkness. At first, I saw nothing, just the shadowy outline of the trees and the faint glimmer of the streetlights. But then I noticed it. Standing just at the edge of the yard, barely visible in the dim light, was a figure. Small and hunched, wrapped in tattered fabric, its limbs twisted at unnatural angles. I gasped, stumbling back from the window, my heart pounding in my chest. It was the same figure I'd seen in the woods, the same pile of clothes that had been left on my porch. But now it was moving slowly, deliberately, inching closer to the house. I didn't wait to see what it would do next. I ran, grabbing my phone and dialing 911 with shaking hands. The operator answered, but I could barely get the words out, my voice trembling with fear. I told them someone was outside, that I needed help, but I didn't know how to explain what I'd seen. The police arrived within minutes, their lights flashing as they searched the yard and the surrounding area. But they didn't find anything, no figure, no tracks, nothing. It was as if whatever had been there had vanished into thin air. They tried to reassure me, telling me it was probably just a prank, maybe some kids messing around. But I knew better. Whatever it wasn't a prank, and it wasn't going to stop. The next few days were a blur. Couldn't sleep, couldn't eat. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw that figure, felt its eyes on me, watching, waiting. I avoided the woods, the trail, anything that reminded me of what had happened. But the feeling of dread never left me, always lurking at the edge of my thoughts. Then, one morning, I woke up to find the front door open. I knew I had locked it the night before, had checked it twice before going to bed. But now, it was wide open, the cold morning air seeping into the house. I didn't want to go outside, didn't want to see what might be waiting for me, but I couldn't ignore it. I grabbed a kitchen knife and slowly made my way to the door, my heart pounding in my chest. When I stepped outside, I saw it immediately, the same pile of clothes now lying in the middle of the yard, perfectly still. But this time, there was something different, something beneath the clothes, something lumpy and misshapen. I hesitated, my breath catching in my throat as I reached out with the tip of the knife, nudging the fabric aside. What I saw made me recoil in horror. Beneath the clothes was a small, hollowed-out tree stump, the inside smooth and empty, just like the trees in the woods. and inside the stump, nestled in the hollow, was something dark and rotting. Something that smelled of decay and death. I backed away, dropping the knife as I ran inside, slamming the door behind me. I didn't know what to do, didn't know how to make it stop. The police couldn't help, and I couldn't keep running forever. So, I did the only thing I could think of. I packed a bag and left. I drove as far as I could, putting as much distance between myself and those woods as possible. I didn't tell anyone where I was going, didn't look back. I just kept driving until I couldn't drive anymore. It's been weeks now, and I'm still looking over my shoulder, still jumping at every shadow. The memories of those hollow trees, of the figure wrapped in tattered clothes, haunt me every night. I don't know what it was, and I don't want to know. All I know is that it's still out there somewhere, and it's only a matter of time before it finds me again. Last summer, I inherited a small, secluded cabin from my uncle. It was tucked away in the woods behind his old house, a charming but somewhat dilapidated structure. Despite its state of disrepair, I saw it as a chance to get away from the city and enjoy some solitude. My uncle had always spoken fondly of the cabin, and I was eager to see it for myself. When I first arrived at the cabin, I was greeted by the sight of a weather-beaten wooden structure surrounded by dense forest. The cabin itself was quaint, with a sloping roof and a small porch. The windows were dusty, and the paint was peeling, but there was a certain rustic charm to it. I decided to spend the weekend there, cleaning up and getting acquainted with my new retreat. The inside of the cabin was as you might expect from an old, unused building. Furniture covered in dust, cobwebs in the corners, and a musty smell that lingered in the air. I spent the first day sweeping, dusting, and making the place somewhat livable. The cabin had a small kitchen, a modest living area, and a single bedroom. Despite its age and condition, it felt cozy. On the second day, after a morning of more cleaning, I decided to explore the area around the cabin. I ventured into the surrounding woods, following an overgrown path that seemed to lead further into the forest. The woods were dense and quiet, with only the occasional rustle of leaves and the distant call of a bird to break the silence. After walking for a while, I came across a small clearing with a faded old swing set. It looked like it hadn't been used in years, and the swings creaked softly in the breeze. As I was about to turn back, I noticed something odd beneath the swing set. Partially hidden by the overgrown grass was a small metal box. Curiosity got the better of me, and I dug it out of the dirt. The box was rusted and covered in grime, but it was still intact. I brushed off the dirt and managed to pry it open with some effort. Inside the box was a collection of old photographs, letters, and a small leather-bound journal. The photographs were yellowed with age and depicted various scenes. Some of people I didn't recognize and others of places that seemed vaguely familiar. The letters were faded and difficult to read, but they seemed to be from the early 20th century. The journal, however, caught my attention the most. It was filled with handwritten entries in a neat, looping script. I took the box back to the cabin and spent the rest of the day poring over its contents. The journal was particularly intriguing. It belonged to someone named Clara, and the entries detailed her life and experiences in the cabin. From the journal, I gathered that Clara had lived there many decades ago, and her writings painted a picture of a quiet, content life. However, as I read further, the entries grew darker and more unsettling. Clara's entries began to mention strange occurrences. She wrote about hearing footsteps outside the cabin at night, even though she was alone. She described seeing shadowy figures in the woods and feeling a constant, inexplicable sense of being watched. Her descriptions became more frantic as the entries continued, and she spoke of a growing dread that she could not shake. One entry, written in a shaky hand, particularly stood out. Clara wrote about a night when she was certain someone had entered the cabin while she was asleep. She described waking up to find her belongings scattered and a feeling of cold, oppressive silence. She ended the entry with a cryptic note, "I fear they are coming for me. I must leave this place before it's too late." As I read these entries, I couldn't help but feel a growing sense of unease. The descriptions of Clara's experiences mirrored some of my own feelings of discomfort. Though I hadn't experienced anything as disturbing as what Clara described, I found myself increasingly wary of the cabin and the surrounding woods. That evening, as the sun set and the shadows lengthened, I decided to take a walk around the cabin. The forest was darker now, and the trees seemed to close in, their branches reaching out like skeletal fingers. I tried to shake off the feeling of being watched, but it lingered, making me feel as though I was not alone. Back at the cabin, I tried to focus on the practicalities of setting up the place, but my mind kept drifting back to Clara's journal. The stories of her experiences seemed to be haunting me, and I couldn't shake the feeling that something was amiss. That night, I was awoken by a noise. It was a soft scratching sound coming from outside the cabin. My heart raced as I lay still in the dark, trying to determine what it was. The sound persisted, growing louder and more persistent. It was as if someone or something was trying to get in. I mustered the courage to get up and investigate. I grabbed a flashlight and went outside, scanning the perimeter of the cabin. The night was still and quiet, the only sound the rustling of leaves in the breeze. I checked the windows and doors, but everything appeared to be secure. Despite my best efforts, I couldn't find the source of the noise. The rest of the night was restless. I lay awake, jumping at every little sound, and the journal's chilling entries played on a loop in my mind. When morning finally came, I was exhausted and on edge. I decided to pack up and leave the cabin earlier than planned. The sense of unease was overwhelming, and I couldn't shake the feeling that staying any longer would only make things worse. As I packed up my things and prepared to leave, I couldn't help but glance back at the cabin one last time. The once charming retreat now seemed menacing and foreboding. I made a mental note to return the journal and the box to their hiding place before I left, hoping that it might offer some solace to the next visitor, or at least keep them aware of the cabin's dark history. I left the cabin behind, my nerves still frayed and my mind troubled by the unsettling experiences of the past few days. The journey back to the city was filled with a sense of relief mixed with lingering curiosity about the cabin and Clara's life. Though I never returned to the cabin, the memory of that weekend and the eerie journal stayed with me, a reminder of the unsettling and inexplicable aspects of the past that can still reach out to us, no matter how much time has passed.